Marvel movies had a deaf character, and she also signed. A friend of mine and I took issue with a thing from there where she was able to detect somebody coming behind her, or she thought what was happening behind her. I'm like, okay, that's a little going a little too far. Yes, I can feel vibration sometimes, but I would not be able to get that much information just from vibration. That's just not reality.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Brave UX. I'm Brendan Jarvis, Managing Founder of The Space in Between, the behaviour-based UX research partner for enterprise leaders who want an independent perspective to align hearts and minds. You can find out more about me and what we do at thespaceinbetween.co.nz. Here on Brave UX, though, it's my job to help you to keep on top of the latest thinking and important issues affecting the field of design. I do that by unpacking the stories, learnings, and expert advice of a diverse range of world-class leaders. My guest today is Meryl Evans. Meryl is a certified professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, a professional speaker, trainer, and accessibility marketing consultant who believes that accessibility is everyone's responsibility. It's this belief that's led to her work for the disability community being recognised both near and far, including by the North Texas Disability Chamber and LinkedIn, where she was named one of the 12 top LinkedIn voices for accessibility advocacy. Since 2000, Meryl has been a trusted source of digital marketing knowledge, contributing to publications like the Dallas Morning News, PC Today, and Marketing Profs, among many others. Oh, and she's also been quoted in the Wall Street Journal. But it's not just her writing that people are after, it's her voice. She's given talks at TEDx, South by Southwest, and the American Marketing Association, and has spoken for companies like Google, Pearson, and Workday. She's also the author of the brilliant Outlook Pocketbook and co-author of Adapting to Web Standards, CSS and Ajax for Big Sites. And if that wasn't enough, Meryl is a passionate volunteer contributing to the W3C's Immersive Captions community group and XR Access, ensuring that XR tech is accessible to people with disabilities. And now she's here with me for this conversation on Brave UX. Meryl, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Brendan. I'm excited to enjoy our conversation.
Me too, Meryl, very much so. And I understand one of the fascinating things that I learned about you, there were many, is that you have an IMDb profile because you featured in a film called BBS, the documentary. Now, there may be some people that are listening to us today that don't know what a BBS is, so let's start there. What is a BBS, and how did you come to be in a documentary about them?
So BBS stands for Bulletin Board System. Basically, a pre-internet, long before the internet. Some of your audience might remember Prodigy, America Online. It was before that too. So, you know how websites, there are forums where you can have conversations with people, community forums where you can comment, reply to people. So it was like that. It was that kind of a system back then, and it was a great way to meet people. And I really appreciated it because this was when I was a teenager. It gave me a way to communicate with people without using a phone. I didn't have to call anybody to be part of the conversation. That's an amazing thing for me. I came to be in BBS, the documentary, because Jason Scott, the creator of that, and I connected. I can't remember how or well, but I told him my background with BBSs and how I ran one for a couple of years and how I met my spouse on a BBS. So I called the vintage internet dating because it was before the internet. BBS is not a dating website. It was just a way we could meet each other.
other than your spouse, which of course was a very important meeting through a BBS, who else did you meet during that time of your life through the BBS systems?
I'm trying to remember. I met people from mostly the North Texas area. When I got on a BBS, I lived in Fort Worth. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and BBSs were very local based at the time. So there was one of the BBSs had a picnic where you can meet people in person. So that's how I met my spouse and his roommates. And it just went from there. When I moved to Washington, D.C., I was on a couple of BBSs, and same thing. I met people in person. No one really stands out. I just met, people from all walks of life.
And like you said, I mean, people can possibly hear, Meryl, that you have an accent, and I think you described that accent better than I could, so I'll let you describe that accent for people. But you mentioned that one of the things that the BBS system allowed you to do was to engage in community with people. And you were also someone who very early on in the age of the internet, I think sometime around the early 1990s, joined the internet, right? So this is post-BBS, via something called Internet in a Box. What was Internet in a Box?
Okay. As you mentioned, you were asking about my accent. So my accent is one that you can't travel anywhere to find it. I was born with it because I was born profoundly deaf. I usually mention it up front, just in case, there are people who've never met me. So I forgot to mention that early on, so thank you for that reminder. Anyway, Internet in a Box, this was in the 90s, and it was software. So it was on a disk, a square black disk, and you insert it into your computer, kind of like you do with USB devices now, thumb drives, and it set up your computer and modem so you could connect to the internet, because it was complicated back then. So that's all it was. It was just a tool for connecting to the internet. And things were harder to find back then. It was very archaic by today's standards, but it was very cool to be part of it early on.
And you obviously took this involvement that you had with the internet early on, and some people may have heard in your introduction that you have been a trusted source of digital marketing information, and also in more recent years, accessibility and the training and other services that you provide in that area. But back in 2007, as I mentioned in your introduction, you were the co-author of a book about front-end web development called Adapting to Web Standards, CSS and Ajax for Big Sites. I was really curious, how did that come to be? How did you go from Internet in a Box in 1992 or 3 to becoming a co-author of a book such as that?
Well, actually, I became the co-author Outlook 2007, so then the DSS book. I can't remember what year the DSS book was. But during that time frame, in the 2001 to 2007, around there, I got to know a lot of publishers through online. I can't even remember how it came to be, but for the Outlook 2007, I knew the person who created the series, and I believe she recommended me to be one of the authors of this series. And then the CSS was one of the co-authors, and that one knew me and referred me to join them in that book. So it's your connection I was very lucky to make.
I believe, and maybe my research or my memory's off here, but you came across Jeffrey Zeldman at some point in your travels.
Yeah, wow. I interviewed Jeffrey and Steve Champion. They were the co-founders of Web Accessibility Standards Project, and the purpose was to encourage and establish web standards, because even today, if you use 5 different browsers, a website will look exactly the same on all 5 different browsers. So they were trying to fix that so you're not having to program for the different browsers. Anyway, Molly Hoslag, who is a very prolific author, rest in peace, unfortunately she passed away. I don't remember how we met, but it was my first professional writing assignment to interview Jeffrey and Stephen for the article about Web Standards Project.
And you've done a lot of writing since then. I mean, you mentioned that was your first professional writing job. You've written, obviously, books since then. You've probably done many interviews. I know that you've contributed to many different well-known publications over the years, both traditional media and also online media. But one of the more unusual topics that you've written about is buffaloes. What exactly did you have to say to people about buffaloes?
Oh, that was really strange. I don't remember how the person found me, but he needed me to do an article on buffaloes, and it was just a matter of the research and writing about it. That was probably the most obscure, unusual topic I've ever written about in my professional career. So far off the mark of what I typically write about.
Do you remember any interesting facts or things about buffaloes?
Not at all. And another publication I wrote for was Bellard's magazine, which is out in pool table, with the bar, the queue in the bar. Yes. I wrote for them a few years. They had awards for websites about Bellard's, and I would do the research to find websites and give them awards. Top website for Bellards, yeah.
Meryl, people who may be watching the video version of this, even those that are listening, can hear how clear and confident you are in a situation like this, right? We've met each other once before here, but this is a recorded situation, right? This is not normal for most people. That wasn't always the case for you, right? So how did taking a leap of faith by producing a little marketing video back in 2018 change your career?
One of my clients said that I should do video, even though I was in digital marketing and I knew about the value of video. I was reluctant because of my accent that hails from nowhere. Anybody can travel. And I wasn't sure how people would respond. I know it's different, and it just is, right? So I made a very short video clip and captioned it, and the response was just amazing. I got a lot of response. It was just a 20-second video asking a question. I can't even remember what the question is anymore. So that told me people were okay with my accent. And I just kept doing more and more videos over time. And the interesting thing, it was originally I made videos about marketing because that's what I did. That's what I wanted people to hire me to do for them. But I found myself on the flip side of Caption for the first time in my life. I was the creator of Caption instead of the viewer of Caption. In doing so, I started making videos about why quality captions matter. Just adding them is not enough. And even looking at my original caption videos from the early days, I cringe because there were things that could have done better. And so that led to speaking engagement. And again, that showed me people were cool with my accent. They were interested in what I had to say. I've always been comfortable with public speaking, but again, I knew about the accent. So it was nice to get that affirmation from people who invited me to speak, and it snowballed from there.
And I understand that not that long after, right? So a couple of years after you published that first video, this will be recent in people's memories, the COVID-19 pandemic arrived, and that, what it obviously overtly terrible time that was for many of us. But I understand that there may have been at least a small silver lining in there for you and perhaps others in the deaf community in the way that it introduced a change in the technology that allowed us to all communicate. What was the change that happened during COVID-19 in technology, and how did that influence or impact your life?
That's what my TEDx talk is about, if anybody wants to see it. Before COVID-19 hit, there was at the video platform. People were using Zoom, GoToMeeting, other platforms Skype, but they did not have caption. So I cannot rely on just the video alone. Yes, I lip read, but it only captures so much, about a third on average. And there's a lot of misinformation. The fact that COVID hit and everybody was using video calls to communicate and collaborate, it forced the video company to start adding caption. And by May and June of 2020 is when the three major platforms had caption. It was imperfect, but it was the start of it. And then many apps have come out that allow you to caption your videos, or they are video creation apps that add a captioning functionality to the app. So that was the difference maker. Before that happened, I had hardly any meeting. Most of my collaboration was online through emails and chat and so forth. After that, I started having meetings, and it was just so nice to be able to engage with people, because there's a difference between engaging on video than there is in an email. So that really helped my emotional state to feel, and I felt like more included, and my thoughts mattered because I was able to be included.
In real time, right? Not the asynchronous nature of an email or a chat conversation.
Exactly. So, yeah, it makes a big difference. And I find some people are not the greatest communicators by email. So video offers another option.
Now, we're recording this today in a platform called Riverside. And last week I realized, probably a little late in the game, that Riverside doesn't do automated live captioning, but you're actually using, I think it's Chrome you mentioned today, to take what I'm saying and to do live captioning for you on your end. How well has it been keeping up with my Kiwi accent so far?
Pretty good. Actually, I decided to open up the Windows 11 caption, and I put them over Chrome because Chrome was having problems. It kept getting delayed or something. So I got the Windows 11, and they've been doing really well. That's another game changer. Microsoft added caption to the Windows operating system with Windows 11. Before that, I had to rely on Chrome and Zoom. But the problem with that is, if I wanted to caption a conversation that was not inside a browser, I couldn't get a caption. Windows 11 operating system makes it possible to caption any conversation. It can be in an app, it can be in a browser, it can be live, because it has a microphone. I was talking to somebody in my office, and I turned on the microphone so they could see the caption work in a live setting as well. So that was a huge game changer because it expanded my ability to use captions beyond browsers and Zoom.
Mm-hmm. And if we wind the clock back a little, I think you mentioned in May or June 2020, the three big video calling platforms introduced live captioning. And then back in 2022, as part of iOS 16 and macOS Ventura, Apple introduced live captions into their OS, similar to, it seems like, Microsoft has done with Windows. But not everyone in the community was happy with what they released. What were the criticisms leveled against Apple, and were they fair in your mind?
I don't recall what the criticism was for Apple specifically. I do know that Apple is still not perfect, even today. What I really appreciated about Apple releasing live captions for their phone is they put it in beta. So instead, in the app, that is better. So we know they're not going to be perfect. They're going to have problems, and that was okay. I'd rather have the feature sooner than later, even if it's not perfect. But Google Android got live captions before Apple, and they're better because they work better. Apple doesn't always work. It just depends on what it is that is captioning. And a lot of times it's like nothing happens. So that's really frustrating. Usually when there's criticism about caption, like Twitter added live caption for video, it automatically captioned any video. People were complaining, you can't edit the caption. But my point of view is progress over perfection, like my short day, is that, look, they added caption. At least we have the functionality now. At some point, they'll let us be able to edit it. It's iterative. You gotta be able to make progress. Software is always an iterative process. You keep working through the bug. Yeah.
What led you, because I've heard you, and obviously you've got your shirt on at the moment, progress over perfection. What was it that you experienced or that you've come to believe that progress over perfection is a better way of approaching things like captioning in systems?
It wasn't any one specific thing. I don't recall how it came about, but Christopher Patno of Google and I have always somehow talked about progress over perfection when it comes to accessibility, because accessibility is so big, and people with disabilities in Africa are so passionate about it that they get frustrated when something's not accessible or could be better. And I'm like, we need to take a different approach. We need to look at things differently. People are so overwhelmed with getting started or making progress with accessibility. We need to look at it as an iterative process rather than something with the finish line. After all, nothing could be 100% accessible. That's almost impossible. Because what makes something accessible for one person can make it inaccessible for someone else. And the perfect example, a simple one, is dark and light mode. There are people who detest dark mode, and there are lots of people like me who don't like light mode. So you can't have both unless you make it an option. Thankfully, a lot of software have made it an option so you can choose. But if I'm giving a presentation and somebody doesn't like my colors, they're out of luck because they cannot control that.
Yeah, I've heard you say before that accessibility is important because it gives people options. And what I'm hearing you say there is that it's important to give options when you're implementing or making a product accessible because it's not a one-size-fits-all type solution.
Exactly, absolutely. Even people have different preferences when it comes to caption. The best caption is the user preference. That's number one. But when you can't do that, then you fall on the captioning best practices, which are most likely to make the majority of people happy. You'll never make 100% of people happy because I have a hard of hearing friend who prefers transcripts over caption. They're not the same thing. And I know a couple people who like karaoke style caption, which I can't use at all because I cannot absorb the information. It feels like a game of hide and seek. My eyes are following the highlighted word that my brain is not absorbing what it's saying.
Before we move off captions, I understand that there is such a thing as overdoing captioning, and captioning is clearly, it's become one of your areas of expertise and advocacy. And you've also spoken about before how you're a fan of the Stranger Things TV show. And yet when you got to season 4, because I think you'd binge watched seasons 1 to 3, and then you got to season 4 and you weren't very impressed with how they'd altered the way that they were captioning that particular season. What could they have done better? What did they do that they could have done differently or that they didn't do quite so well?
The biggest thing was I never thought I would complain that it's possible to caption too much, to over-caption. Now, obviously, I'm not talking dialogue because caption should always reflect dialogue. But it was how they were captioning the sounds that went overboard, because they were captioning every sound, it seemed like. The littlest thing, like a can opener. I mean, like a 1-second action, we don't need it because we see it happening on the screen. And I'm telling you, my eyes were exhausted. after watching season 4, because it became the caption show, I felt like I was reading the whole show instead of scanning the caption and caching the video. So what's interesting is it has a specific style. And there was another show I was watching, I can't remember what it was, but I contacted someone and I asked them if their company did the caption for it. And they confirmed they did. So I recognize that style of captioning. I don't know, there's just something unique about it. Plus, they use some words and terms that everyone's not familiar with, like eldritch. I have no idea what eldritch means, even after looking it up. It's the eldritch music, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. So, and I have a pretty high level of vocabulary, yeah. So, if there are words I don't get, that's the problem. Captioning sound should be at a lower grade level because people from all walks of life are watching those captions. There is no prejudice on who watches a TV show or a movie. They may not be as educated as someone else, or, for whatever reason. So, captioning should be easy to read, easy to scan, and understand without putting a lot of effort. Basically, a process that requires little effort on the viewer. They should be able to just read it and follow the action on the screen.
That's quite insightful, at least personally for me, because I had never previously considered that when it comes to captioning, that it has to be, intellectually is not the right word here, but accessible in a way that anybody without subject matter expertise can understand the content. So that's what you were speaking about there regarding the use of the term eldritch, which I believe comes from D&D, and I hadn't heard about it before you'd raised it either, and I looked into it as well. I would have had no idea what that meant, so that wasn't accessible for me as a viewer. And also, you were speaking there about the captioning of sound and how over-captioning, in particular things that are happening on the screen, that if you're able to see the screen, you can intimate from what's happening what the sounds may be. That actually places a cognitive burden on people who need to rely on captions to enjoy and access and participate in the content. And they're two very insightful and specific areas of accessibility that I hadn't considered when it came to captioning before.
Me neither. Most people, when they caption, they're not going to go overboard because there's a lot to do. So I appreciate the creator, the captioner for wanting to level up. But captioning is not the place to get creative. As my friend, captioning is for information, not entertainment. And unfortunately, with season 4 of Stranger Things, they became entertainment because everybody was talking about how cool they were, blah, blah, blah. But captions are not meant to work that way. Just like when you see sign language interpreters at a rock concert, I'm sure you've seen those videos go viral where they're signing and they're very animated, right? The purpose of that is for the people who use sign language. It's for them. It's not something that's supposed to be a show for everybody. They're just like if you're watching UN and somebody translating for someone, you don't see that translator. They are in the background. They are, yes. So, but in the example that I'm giving, they're treating sign language like entertainment. And by that same token, caption should be for information, not entertainment.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Meryl, I want to come back now to the change in your career that happened several years ago now. And that's when you became a more prominent advocate for people with disabilities. And you've started to speak on behalf of a very diverse community, which of course you have acknowledged previously yourself about the diversity that exists within the community. That could seem like a rather daunting self-imposed obligation, right? Could seem like you're taking a lot of weight on your shoulders here. How do you think about the responsibility you've assumed for advocating for other people with disabilities?
Sometimes I'm the only one in the room. So I have listened to so many people's stories from across the disability spectrum, and I hold them in my heart because there are just times where you're the only one in the room for whatever reason. It's not a lack of oversight. I could be the only a speaker for an event. They just want one speaker. They don't want a speaker from every possible disability category. So I listen to those stories, I listen to the barriers, and I keep those stories close to me because I know that no one can represent all the categories, all the disabilities. I can't even represent all deaf people either because we are just as diverse as anything else. But I have friends who prefer sign language. They prefer to communicate by using sign language. And I have listened to their stories of what they like, what they don't like. But that's just one thing where we are different. I speak, they sign, but we have so much more in common in the barriers that we face as deaf people. Not hearing fire alarm, that kind of thing. How lighting, there's many things we have in common. And unfortunately, difficult because there's a lot of conflict within disability, unfortunately. And I try my best to care and be friendly with everyone, regardless of their preferences, choices, and disabilities, because everyone matters.
Meryl, you mentioned how you listen to the stories of other people within the disability community, and I'm really curious about your story. And I understand that you're the youngest of 3 children, yet I heard you describe yourself somewhere as practically an only child, of which I am. I'm an only child. That's another story. What did you mean by that?
I am the youngest by 10 and 14 years. So my sister went off to college when I was 3 years old. So I have no memory of ever living with her. And my brother went off when I was 7. So I would say 11 years of being in the house by myself. It's almost like being an only child.
And when you were a child, when you were alone in the house with your parents growing up, what approach did they take to helping you to navigate the world as a deaf person?
So when they found out I was deaf, they talked to experts, of course, in the field. And at the time, oral was the standard. They wanted me to learn how to speak and lip read. That was just a common thing. Unfortunately, sometimes the community blames parents. My parents were going based on experts. They may also blame experts for doing that as well. Again, it's based on the information they had at the time. So I don't believe in blaming anyone. Everybody was doing what they can with the information they had at the time, regardless if it was negative or whatever. There's no point in dwelling on it. Now, if I were to start over, I would love to be bilingual, be fluent in sign language and a speaker. That way I have options in how I do things. So, in growing up, I was not exposed to people who spoke sign language regularly. So it never came to the point where I had someone in my life who was fluent in sign language. Learn it and keep it up. It is just like any other language. I took 3 years of Spanish in high school. That means 5 days a week I learned Spanish. But even with that, I still didn't become fluent. So sign language is a language just like Spanish and French with its own syntax. So I really needed to have somebody in my life who was fluent to be able to learn it and keep it up. So it's just how my life worked out. It's not a bad or a good thing. It's just how things worked out.
One of the things that I learned about you, Meryl, is that at high school you played volleyball, and this is a competitive team-based sport, right, which typically relies on verbal communication between the team in order to receive and set up the ball to be played. How did you and your team make that work?
Well, sports was my thing growing up. I started playing soccer when I was 4 or 5 years old. I did t-ball, I did softball, I did basketball and volleyball. And it wasn't until I was grown up with kids of my own that I realized how lucky I was, because I have heard stories from deaf people who could not play a sport because the organization or the coach will not let them, which is unbelievable to me. I never ran into that. I was very, very lucky that way. And my coaches never treated me like a child. Well, I mean, I was a child, so, but I meant they didn't treat me as incapable. And I was actually good at them in the sport, and they put me out there. I have no idea how my team and I communicated, especially I like using volleyball as an example, because you have a small court of 6 people in a very tight spot, and somebody's got to call for the ball, and basketball as well. But all I can figure is maybe I just used my eyes a lot and kept my eyes open for what was going on, because I can catch the smallest thing. That's my best guess.
I don't want to get into too much conjecture here, but I couldn't help but think about this over the last couple of days, and I was curious to understand your perspective on whether or not you felt that playing in a team, the team comes to a non-verbal understanding of how to play together and how to work together, where to be, how each other moves and which plays they may receive. You know, this kind of non-verbal language that exists within team sports and teams that have played together. Reflecting on your time playing team sports, do you get a sense that any of that came to play in a way that you were able to participate at such a great level, a high level, along with everybody else and not be treated any differently?
I think you're right, Brendan, that it was probably a team effort as well, that we just had a nonverbal way of being like one entity. Plus, I had the added requirement of having to watch everything very carefully what was going on.
I understand that there was a coach at one point called Coach Frank who you were quite fond of turning your hearing aids off when he was speaking.
Yeah, there's that joke all the time. There's also a joke I posted. My dad called me over during a soccer game, and he was chiding me for something. I don't know what I did. And I basically turned out my hearing aid, closed my eyes, and my dad looked at the pen in the stand and sent me back out in the field. So it's just a little running joke. It didn't happen very often. I wasn't a precocious child. I was actually a very easy kid because I listened, I didn't rebel. I kept my room very clean. I've always been a neat freak my whole life.
You and I will get on really well then. I'm also a particular neat freak. Hey, Meryl, you mentioned your TEDx talk earlier, and I mentioned that in your introduction as well, I think. Now, you started that talk by playing a clip of a person speaking in Japanese. What were you trying to illustrate to the audience?
2 different things. The one was to show them they're watching a video, they can't understand what they're saying because it's not in English. And so that is my life, person who speaks English and doesn't understand other people who speak English. So that was where I was going with it, was a combination. I have a lot in common with people whose first language is not English. And we run into these barriers, but my own more so because I can't understand other people who speak my same language. So I have that downside, yeah.
You mentioned earlier, Meryl, around not learning ASL as a matter of circumstance. It was, not the advice that was given to your parents at the time. It was a product of its time. You learned rather, as from my way of looking at it, and a rather impressive skill, which is to be able to read other people's lips. Now, I understand there are limitations around that, and I think you mentioned that it's really about 30% or 33% of the words, a third, that you can accurately spot by just watching someone's lips. And that there are also, I think you taught me through some of your material, that there are some words that sound that come across the same as they are enunciated or as the lips are moving. So it's not a perfect transcription, if you like, of live conversation. But what influence did that skill set have on your ability to build relationships with other people?
Well, it gives me a way to communicate with people, and that is very important. And all of our live communication is how we connect with people, period. End of story. And the reason that lip reading is more like lip guessing, because there are a lot of sounds that look the same when you say it, the way you pronounce them on the lips. And I'd like to give the example of mom, pop, bop, and mop. I just have 4 different words that would look the same to a lip reader. So my implant helps me distinguish them by their sound because of that hard B or stuff, M, that kind of thing. How much I catch, as I said in my TED Talk, depends on the person and the variable. There are factors that come to play. So in our conversation, we've got the video, we've got caption, and we have a quiet space. I don't have other noises getting in the way of our conversation. So we're having a very good conversation where I'm catching more. But in a standard situation, when I'm out there, there's noise in there, and of course how people enunciate. Some people don't enunciate well, they mumble, and that's very hard to understand. Add to that an accent. So, yes, you have a Kiwi accent, but I've been following you just fine in this setting. But if we were in a noisy setting, it would have been harder.
You've previously said that one of the positives that's come out of the difficulty that you've experienced connecting with people or groups in particular in situations where it's more difficult to lip read because of outside noise or conversation that's bouncing around between different people, is that you've become, and I'll use your own words now, good at spotting the quiet ones and bringing them into the conversation. Now, that's a really beautiful thing, that ability to be able to spot the quiet people and bring them in. What surprised you the most over the years as a result of developing and using that skill?
I can't say anything surprises me, but I just notice that to be excluded, and I go out of my way to make sure everyone's included. But I'm also careful in how I include them. For example, if I'm in a meeting and someone hasn't spoken up and shared their thoughts, I don't just call them out. I don't say, hey, you haven't spoken up. I would like to hear your thoughts. I won't do that because some people get anxiety when they're put on the spot like that. What I might do is send them a chat, a private chat, and say, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you want to share them with me or that kind of thing. So I try to give people options, just like I always ask for communication. I try to give people options as well.
Let's talk about options, because I understand that there are many things that as a hearing person I take for granted, including when I'm ordering food at a drive-through. You once had a rather challenging experience while trying to do the same thing. What was that experience, and what does it highlight about the importance of options?
When I used to go to the drive-through to get drinks at a famous place, I'm not going to name names, I just got in the habit of repeating myself and hope they heard me. And that worked most of the time. Really did it not work. But it was kind of stressful because I didn't know if they were catching me. I mean, I can't work with a speaker. I mean, there's no video, there's nothing. And now that changed a lot. One of my favorite things to do for a treat is to go to the coffee shop, but I order through the app. So no more do I have to worry about getting the order wrong or my name wrong because the app has it. And whenever I order a restaurant or a coffee shop, I always avoided changing up my order. You know, people customize their order. I avoided that because that just makes it more complicated and it creates a greater chance of them getting the order wrong. So think that I feel like I can do more. But usually when I go to a restaurant, I point at the menu, try to make myself clear, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Meryl, you've previously said, and I'll quote you again now, we all have assumptions. It's human nature. As a deaf person, I've encountered many. That's why I believe in education. The more we know, the more we understand and respect each other. What's the biggest incorrect assumption about being a deaf person you have personally encountered?
That's easy. Everybody assumes that I am fluent in sign language. And again, that's not a bad or a good thing. It's just how my life worked out. And it surprises me that I'm still having to educate people about that, because I have there are far more deaf and hard of hearing people who don't sign than those who do. And I was having a conversation with my spouse about that, because even in my life, I have met so many deaf and hard of hearing people, including groups where they are signers. And I tell you, most people don't know sign. It's just how things are. And so I was asking my spouse, why are people still making this assumption after so many years and so much education and awareness? And we agreed that a lot of it is media, entertainment. They keep portraying deaf people as signers who don't speak. They rarely have characters that are speakers who are deaf and or hard of hearing. So I think that's part of the problem is Hollywood and theater don't have a good, accurate depiction of real people. Yes, there are people who sign and don't speak, absolutely. But they do it in such a way that it seems like most of us are that way. They don't show the diversity.
I've just been watching the later seasons of The Walking Dead. Gosh, I almost forgot the show there.
Oh, I don't watch that.
Yeah, it's a bit scary and probably a little bit violent. It's one of my guilty pleasures. There's an actress in there, Lauren Ridloff, I should say, and Lauren plays a deaf person. And you're right, that's Lauren's portrayed. Her character is portrayed as a person who uses, I assume, ASL, given the setting is in Georgia, as a primary way of communicating. So that's just one reference, and I'm sure there are many others. And I was also thinking about this in terms of like our local context here in New Zealand. So New Zealand has 3 official languages. It's got English, Te Reo, which is the Māori language, and New Zealand Sign Language is the 3rd language. That's an official language of our country. But you're right, it's very much in that popular narrative. It's not really, people aren't very conscious. That's not the only way in which deaf people learn to communicate. Exactly.
That's very true. Even Marvel movies had a deaf character, and she also signed. A friend of mine and I took issue with a thing from there. Well, she was able to detect somebody coming behind her, or she thought what was happening behind her. I'm like, okay, that's a little going a little too far. Yes, I can feel vibration sometimes, but I would not be able to get that much information just from vibration. That's just not reality. So that's part of the problem.
There's obviously a big gap to be closed here around people's perceptions of people who are deaf and what that's like and how they currently see things. In your experience, and perhaps you speak specifically or as broadly as you like, it's up to you, but in your experience as an advocate for accessibility, what approaches have you found to be the most effective in educating other people about disability or deafness, maybe specifically, in a way that builds understanding and respect amongst everyone involved?
Mainly telling my story of the barriers I went into. Storytelling is very powerful, but that only works for some audiences. When you're dealing with decision makers, they want data, they want numbers, and that's not always so easy to provide. So like with caption, I focus on how captioning benefits everybody. But if you're getting feedback on the quality of the caption, you need to work with those who depend on it, like me. Deaf people and hard of hearing people like me who depend on it. We will not be able to follow at all without caption. as opposed to talking to somebody who always has the caption on because they like it. Those are different.
Meryl, you spoke a little earlier on and when you started your previous response about decision makers and how they want to see numbers. And it's probably no secret to anyone listening to this episode that accessibility is not often a core corporate priority. What does it take for it to become a central part of an organization's culture?
Same with everything else that you want to change in a culture. You need a champion. You need an executive buy-in and champion. And I always recommend having at least 2 for disability inclusion and accessibility, because I never want an executive to leave the company and take the effort out with them. That's why it's so important to always have a second person in place. That's step number 1. It's very hard to make the case if you don't have high leadership buy-in. While there are things people can do at the team level, but it's a bigger challenge than if you get executive buy-in. The other thing is to have training on disability awareness and accessibility, and this is not a one-time deal. It needs to be ongoing, just like security. Security is, most companies, as far as I know, require the employees to undergo security training once a year to make sure they don't become complacent. Same thing with disability inclusion and accessibility. It's so big. Keep educating because it's too complicated, but it's worth it because it makes people more inclusive. And besides, accessibility works for a lot of people. And when the whole company thinks that this way, they know they're reaching more people by offering more options. So if somebody prefers to read an article rather than watch the video, they can. If they like the video, great. Captions, they can watch it, even though they don't have the sound on.
You mentioned how with training around accessibility that it needs to be not a one-off thing, that it's something that should be done over and over. And I suspect it has to do with the fact that accessibility is easy to ignore, or it's easy to backslide in the progress that's been made if that isn't happening on a regular basis. And part of me, correct me if I'm wrong, or if you disagree, part of me thinks that has a parallel between a conversation I had on the podcast previously with Tammy Everts, who's an expert in performance optimization for user experience. And a lot of the performance optimization work that goes in, it has to be continuous. Because if you're deploying things through to a live environment over time and you're not keeping your eye on how performant those deployments are, in 6 months' time, you find that your experience is dramatically worse from a performance point of view than it was if you had been keeping an eye on things. And I suspect that it's similar with accessibility. Is that the gist of what you were getting at there, or do you see things differently?
No, that is a great example, a great comparison, because I know as somebody who's had a website for many, many years, I know performance of my website goes up and down based on what I do to it. Accessibility is the same way. It doesn't take much to make a change and break accessibility. So it has to be continuous, something you're always thinking about. That another thing companies need to be doing is making accessibility part of their culture, part of their business, and everyone's job. It's just different aspects. For websites, obviously that would be the product and web design team. They will have responsibility in marketing because marketing creates a lot of content. They need to know how to make their content accessible because that's not the web developer's job. They can set up the framework, but it's the marketers who create the heading in the article. So are they using the heading that are in the software, with the H1, H2, H3, or are they just changing the heading however they want? They're making it bold, they're making it purple, they're putting it in an unreadable font that is taking away from the power of having heading that make it easier for a screen reader to navigate a page. Without those headings, it's harder to navigate.
It's interesting hearing you describe that as well. And again, reflecting on my conversation with Tammy, she had a very similar description of the importance of performance was everyone's responsibility, and didn't necessarily want it to become only one part of the organisation's area of accountability, and that the accountability for keeping an experience performant should be shared. Again, she mentioned marketing in our conversation as well with marketing, because marketing has so much to do, as you've quite rightly pointed out, with introducing new content into the experiences that are being delivered, particularly on websites, and just how you just don't want people to not keep in mind the objective of keeping an experience accessible. They have to be accountable for it. It can't just be one person or one department's responsibility. Now, that creates a degree of work. I mean, let's be honest, it's everything we do to create an experience is work. And it's just work to be doing in the terms of making an experience accessible. But it can also be perceived by some as being overwhelming, as in they don't quite know how to get started or where to begin or how far they need to go. You know, there are many questions people have, even this far into the digital accessibility as a field. What strategies can organisations, or tactics maybe, can organisations use, or people that are advocates or champions for for accessibility use to make meaningful progress without becoming overwhelmed, or without others in their organisations becoming overwhelmed?
I like that example you gave with Tammy. So marketing would be responsible for uploading images, and it's very easy for an image to be too heavy, too big, versus when they're small. I knew this many years ago, and I would post pictures, very small version of my pictures, because I knew that made it lighter, and it was the only way I knew how at the time. So unfortunately, my pictures are terrible because they're small, you can't see, but I was trying to keep the performance high. Yeah, so people need to be trained on how they can make the images lighter without sacrificing the size of the image. Same thing. Now for accessibility, that's why just because you have an executive champion doesn't mean you can't have departmental champion as well. So somebody in HR and on top of that, accessibility should be in everyone's job description. So even if you're the janitor, you need to make sure that the hallways are free of debris and items that get in the way of people's walking path. Things like that. And have role-specific training as well. That's why accessibility training is ongoing, because it's not just about awareness, but it's also about learning what you need to do for your role to help your department be accessible to your employees and customers alike, and vendors even. So every department needs to have somebody who focuses on accessibility to ensure their department does what it needs to do to be accessible. And it's very tempting to talk about checklists. Those are a good starting point, but they should not be the only thing, because just because something's compliant doesn't mean it's a good user experience. And the example I love to give is ramps. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires ramps to buildings. Now, they don't tell you where those ramps need to be. They just say you need to have one. Well, a company could put it in the back of their building, even though everybody comes in the front. So if you're making someone who uses a wheelchair go in the back, that's not a good user experience. So yes, they checked off, yes, we have ramps. You can't make good experience an item on the checklist, because what's good experience? That's where you get input from people with disabilities. They can tell you what's a good experience. And one simple change many companies have made with their bathrooms is they're putting the accessible bathroom up front instead of in the back. You know, most bathrooms will have the accessible bathroom in the back, but they're starting to show up in the front, which makes more sense because they're not having to go as far to get to their accessible bathroom, which is the way it should be.
I was thinking about that example you gave of the ramp at the back of the building as opposed to at the front where everybody else enters. And my suspicion is that, listening to you talk at least, people with a disability already know that they have a disability. They don't need designers to make them feel less than other people by the way in which they create the experiences that they too have to engage with.
Exactly. So I use the example of a restaurant. So somebody who uses a wheelchair is going to dinner with a friend and family. But instead of going up front with their friend and family, they're having to go in the back where the employees go in. And that makes them stick out. That makes them feel isolated because they're having to go around. Granted, there might be employees who use the ramp as well. That's why you want to have them in the front and the back. That's even better than just putting it where everybody goes into the building. So absolutely, that's why involving people with disabilities makes such a difference. We notice these things, and we can tell you these things that you prevent making it stick out when we don't need to.
This is the difference between being compliant, which is the big word in the accessibility orbit, right, in terms of reaching W3C compliance. I understand, or WCAG compliance is one of those sort of benchmarks that some people aspire to, and actually creating an experience that makes the world a better place for people. Like, those two things are not, they're not the same thing. Compliance is the minimum, right? And then there's what else?
WCAG is also the bare minimum. So WCAG says that your logo does not have to be compliant. In other words, the contrast of your logo, if the colors are bad and poor contrast, that's okay, because it's your logo. You're exempt from that. But really, do you want your company's logo not to be visible to some of the population? You're missing out on them. For example, I was in a show and I noticed the theater's logo was red on a green shirt. I told them that they're not going to be able to see it. Anybody who has any kind of low vision or color differences or whatever are not going to be able to see it. And don't you want them to know what theater is playing at, so they know where to go to get tickets? That's an example of why you want your logos to be compliant too, even though there is an exception that it does not have to be. WCAG also has ratios for color contrast. How strong of a contrast between two overlapping colors. Even if a lot of color pairing can pass the color contrast ratio, but not be a good user experience, because I have put examples up and people are surprised that some of them pass because they find it harder to read.
If you think about a logo as there's a saying, the fish stinks from the head. And if you think about a logo, the logo is the head often in an experience or a projection of a company's brand into the world. And if you haven't got that accessible, then what does it say about your value on accessibility for the rest of the things?
Exactly right. Yeah.
I was curious about a term that you've created and shared previously, and that is 360-degree accessibility. And I feel like we've been dancing around this, so I want to specifically ask you about it. What does 360-degree accessibility look like?
It looks like that everything is looked at from an accessibility perspective. Too often, web accessibility is treated in a silo. They think the teams involved with web accessibility are just focused on things digital, making the website accessible. But guess what? If I am shopping, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to Amazon to do a return, and I would print the QR code, I would drive up to the package store and ship it back. That is not digital. Therefore, that process needs to be accessible too, not just what digital. So interactions between customers, offline, online, whatever, need to be accessible. So the restaurant will have a website, and they most likely outsource to a digital company. but they have to think about those interactions that happen in the restaurant in person. Like when I order my drink in the app, fortunately I don't have to talk to anybody. I can just go and pick it up. But somebody else may have trouble because they can't get in the door because the wheelchair doesn't fit or there's not a ramp. So that's what I mean about 360 degrees of accessibility. Accessibility can't exist in a silo. They need to think the full picture.
Well, speaking about silos, one of the catch cries I believe I've heard used by the disability community is nothing about us without us. And many of the people that will be listening to today's episode are designers and will play a role in shaping experiences that will touch the lives of people with disabilities. You've previously been very quick to point out that one person cannot represent everyone with a disability, even as far as the deaf community goes. I think you touched on that earlier. You've said, and I'll quote you again now, when you've met one deaf person, you've met one deaf person. So I just want people to let that sink in for a second. So given that's the truth, how does diversity within the deaf community and among people with disabilities influence, or how should it influence, the approach that organisations or perhaps designers specifically take to involving communities, these communities, when designing products?
It's impossible to capture every possibility in terms of the spectrum, the disability spectrum, and we don't expect you to. But generally, when you work with 3, 4, 5, you'll get enough to book, as long as they're diverse. I mean, there are some nonprofit organizations for disabilities that target a specific area. For example, there are deaf organizations that are very sign language focused, and others that are not, and others that are open to all deaf people. So if you focus on just those who are sign language focused, or those on who are just oral focused, you're not going to get that diversity. So that I've been trying to level up to nothing without us, period. Because it means you've hired a diversity of people with disabilities into your company. They're already there. You need to talk to them, as opposed to nothing about us without us, just think more a consulting basis, like a focus group, and not only part of the story. It's just better to involve us by having us in your company in the first place.
Well, let's talk about that in terms of the hiring conversation that goes on. And there are likely some hiring managers out there that are unsure about how to approach that conversation around accommodations in the workplace. In your experience, what kinds of questions can hiring managers ask, or perhaps how can they ask those questions to ensure individuals feel more comfortable sharing their preferences and needs?
It's a tricky one to answer because every country has their own laws that they have to comply with, and they have to be careful because it requires someone to reveal something about them, and they may not feel safe. Mm-hmm. That's why I talk about one of the most important things for companies to do is to create a culture of disability inclusion. How they include accessibility, everything. They think about accessibility in the job interview process. They think about accessibility in onboarding. It should be obvious when you go to their website. It should be obvious when you look at the position description. There'll be some mention of accessibility. So there's a lot of things the company can do to earn and build that trust that, yes, we are an inclusive company and we want everyone to have what they need to do their job well. I give the example of, it's not always about a disability accommodation. I have a standing desk because I can't sit down for a long time and hurt my legs. And when I was sitting down, I was having to walk every hour to get my legs not hurt. And that was taking time away from work. That was more than I wanted to be away. Now that I was standing there, the only time I leave my office is when I need a real break. not because my leg was forcing me. So that is not a disability accommodation. It's how I'm more productive. For some reason, my legs just aren't, I'm not as productive when I'm sitting down because I'm having to get up to relieve my leg pain.
Maybe you're dreaming of being back on the volleyball court. That's all I can think of. But you're right. It sounds to me what you're saying is that it should be immediately obvious to anyone what the company values by looking at any of the ways that it communicates, particularly during the hiring process. It's not necessarily something that should be hidden or that the person who's interviewing should feel unsure about approaching a conversation or responding to a question that they're asked around how might they be the best productive person that they can be if they were hired.
Exactly. When you have the tools you need, when I get a standing desk and captioning, I am more likely to be more productive than when I don't have a standing desk and access the caption. I mean, isn't that the whole point? You want people to be as productive as possible. And I cannot fathom why any company would want to make the accommodation process difficult, because there was a huge lawsuit. A company lost $1 million lawsuit for something they could have solved in 10 minutes. And as opposed to bringing lawyers in and fighting and taking it to court, it's a lot cheaper. A lot of people don't realize not all accommodations are expensive. In fact, most are free or low cost. Like captions are not free. They weren't in the beginning. Companies do have to pay a cost for captions, but they've offset it in a way so it doesn't cost anything to use them.
And if there's one thing that you'd expect executives in the business to understand, that's profit and loss and things that make you money and things that cost you money. Unfortunately, I think we're going to need more examples of organisations that are not doing the right thing in order to help bring in the kind of change that is required. You need the carrot and the stick, I feel, in this instance.
Yeah, and I interviewed with a job with a company that pretty accessibility forward. But when I got the interview email to set the interview up, I had to provide my phone number and schedule. It was automated. Now I'm like, oh, great. I need a video call because the phone call is just not, it's a stressful situation for me. Mm-hmm. After I set it up, then I got the email saying, if you need accommodation, contact. And I'm like, that should have come first. That would have been less stressful. Anyway, I emailed them and they didn't get back to me until the day before the interview. But fortunately, they rescheduled the interview to get more time to make it all happen. But it's just a simple change, offering option in how you interview.
That's an example of experience design, right? Or service design. Someone has more than likely thought about the steps in that journey that someone who's a potential employee is going through. Just sort of zoom out now, and for my final question, if we consider the designers listening to this, the people that have influence in the way that experiences like that you've just described, Meryl, take place, the shape that they take, if you could encourage them to just take one action today as a result of listening to our conversation, what would that be?
It would be always offer multiple ways to communicate or provide information. And when I say provide information, it's something or input, like inputting information, like a keyboard or, there's different ways. But that's just a very simple thing to offer. I appreciate companies that offer multiple ways to contact tech support. It could be a phone call, it could be online chat, it could be an email. Those little things make a big difference.
Meryl, I really appreciate the brave, kind-hearted and good-humoured way you've approached this conversation. Thank you for so generously sharing your stories and insights with me today.
And thank you for having me and asking those questions, Brendan. It shows that you care about getting those stories and answers out there so we can make change.
100%. You're absolutely right and welcome. Thank you, Meryl. It's been my pleasure If people want to connect with you and they want to keep up to date with all the wonderful things that you're contributing to the community, what is the best way for them to do that?
They can visit my website at meryl.net or find me on LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you, Meryl. And to everyone who's tuned in, it's been great having you here as well. Everything that Meryl and I have covered will be in the show notes, including detailed chapters, in particular on the YouTube video, so you can hop around to the places that interest you the most again. If you've enjoyed the show and you want to hear more great conversations like this with world-class leaders in UX research, product management, design, and of course, accessibility, don't forget to leave a review. Subscribe so the podcast turns up every 2 weeks. And if you found that there was something in here today that you feel one other person at least would get value from, don't be afraid to pass the podcast along to them. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for Brendan Jarvis. There's also a link to my profile at the bottom of the show notes, or head on over to my website, which is thespaceinbetween.co.nz. That's thespaceinbetween.co.nz. And until next time, keep being brave.